At my granddaughter's wedding, I realized exactly what my family thought of me, and they didn't even try to hide it. I noticed it before I even stepped fully into the ballroom. That small rectangular card waiting for me at the check-in table, written in elegant gold calligraphy that caught the chandelier light just enough to make it shimmer, and for a brief second, I smiled because I assumed it would say something simple and warm, something like Margaret Collins, beloved grandmother, the kind of thing that made you feel seen. But when I looked down, really looked, my fingers froze against the edge of the card as if it had suddenly become heavier than it should have been, because instead of my name, it read, "The old lady paying for everything." And for a moment, I thought it had to be some kind of mistake, a printing error, a joke that had gone too far without anyone noticing. But the young woman behind the table didn't look confused when I hesitated. She just smiled politely the way people do when they're paid to keep things moving, and asked if everything was all right. And I heard myself say, "Yes, of course, everything's fine," because I have always been the kind of woman who doesn't make a scene, especially not at my granddaughter's wedding, especially not on a day that was supposed to be perfect. So I pinned that card to my dress with steady hands, even though my chest felt tight in a way I couldn't quite explain, and I walked into the reception like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just been reduced to a punchline in front of hundreds of guests. The ballroom was exactly as I had imagined it when I agreed to pay for this entire wedding 6 months ago. Soft white linens, tall floral arrangements with ivory roses and eucalyptus, a string quartet playing near the stage, everything tasteful and expensive and carefully curated. And for a while, I told myself it didn't matter, that a silly name tag couldn't possibly ruin a day like this. But then I started to notice the looks, the way a few guests glanced down at my chest, and then quickly looked away, the faint smiles. They tried to hide behind champagne glasses, and that's when I overheard it, just a whisper behind me. "Did you see her tag?" Followed by a quiet laugh and another voice saying, "Well, it's true, isn't it? She's basically the family's ATM." And I kept walking, because stopping would have meant acknowledging it, and acknowledging it would have meant admitting that this wasn't an accident. This was intentional. This was something someone had approved, printed, and handed out without a second thought about how it might feel. And I found my son near the bar, laughing with a group of people I barely recognized. And when he saw me, he waved me over like nothing was wrong, like everything was exactly as it should be. And I stood there in my pale blue dress, the one my late husband used to say made me look elegant, feeling suddenly very small in a room I had paid for, surrounded by people celebrating a family that, in that moment, didn't seem to include me at all. And still, I smiled. Because sometimes a smile is the only thing you have left when you finally understand where you stand. The next morning, I was not alone for the first time since that dinner. And that alone felt like something shifting quietly beneath the surface of everything I thought I understood. Mrs. Patterson did not speak right away when she returned with the printed documents. Instead, she placed them gently in front of me and sat down across from me with a seriousness that made the air feel heavier than before. I noticed the way she folded her hands, not like a banker anymore, but like someone about to say something that could not be taken back. "Mrs. Henderson," she said softly, "your husband came to see me several times over the past few years, always alone, always very precise about what he wanted done." I felt my chest tighten slightly, not from fear, but from something closer to recognition, as if a door I did not know existed was beginning to open. "He told me he wanted to make sure you would always be protected no matter what happened to him," she continued, "and no matter what decisions other people might make after he was gone." I stared at the papers in front of me, rows of numbers, account names, unfamiliar terms, but my name was there again and again, not beside Noel's, but alone. "He created accounts that only you could access," she said quietly. "And he set conditions on certain funds, conditions that would only activate if certain actions were taken against you." My fingers rested on the edge of the paper, but I did not turn the page. Yet I was suddenly aware of how still I had been living, how I had been waiting for permission to exist in my own life, while everyone else moved forward without me. "What kind of conditions?" I asked, my voice calm, almost detached. Mrs. Patterson hesitated just for a moment, long enough for me to understand that whatever came next mattered. "If you were forced out of your home or denied access to marital assets," she said carefully, "then full control of several protected funds would transfer to you immediately, including a trust that your husband established 5 years ago." I closed my eyes for a brief second, not from sadness, but from something steadier, something colder. Noel had known He had seen something I had refused to see. He had prepared, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, the way he did everything. Important. I opened my eyes again and finally turned the page. The numbers were larger than I expected, not extravagant, but undeniable, not something that could be brushed aside or dismissed. I could live on this. I could stand on this. More importantly, I could choose with this. Mrs. Patterson leaned slightly forward. There is also one more thing. She said your husband left a letter sealed with instructions that it be given to you only if these conditions were met. She reached into a drawer and placed a single envelope on the desk. Between us, my name was written on it in Noel's handwriting, steady, familiar, unchanged by time. I did not open it right away. Instead, I rested my hand on it, feeling the weight of something that was not just paper, but intention, years of quiet intention. I thought about Wade measuring rooms, as if I were already gone. I thought about Romy speaking about my life, like it was an inconvenience to be reorganized. I thought about the house that held 32 years of my memories being reduced to square footage and potential, and for the first time since that night at the table, I did not feel pushed out. I felt positioned. I looked up at Mrs. Patterson and nodded slowly. Thank you, I said, and I meant it, not just for the information, but for the moment itself, the moment where everything shifted without noise, without spectacle, just clarity. I picked up the envelope and slipped it carefully into my purse, then gathered the documents one by one. My hands were steady. As I stood up, I had walked into the bank feeling like someone trying to understand what was being taken from her. I walked out understanding exactly what had been left for me and how I intended to use it. The drive back from the bank felt different, not because the streets had changed, but because I noticed things I had not noticed before. The way the afternoon light settled across the dashboard, the steady hum of the engine, the quiet certainty in my own breathing. I was not rushing anymore. I was not trying to keep up with anyone else's expectations. When I pulled into the driveway, the house stood exactly as it always had, solid, familiar, waiting. But for the first time since that dinner, I did not see it as something I was about to lose. I saw it as something that had already been secured in ways Wade and Romy did not understand. I stepped inside and closed the door gently behind me. The silence did not feel empty anymore. It felt like space to think, space to decide, space to act on my own terms. I placed my purse on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment, letting the stillness settle around me. Then I took out the envelope Noel had left me and turned it over in my hands. His handwriting was steady as always, no hesitation, no uncertainty, just my name written the way he had written it for decades. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded once. I recognized his voice immediately, not in sound, but in the way the words were arranged, simple, direct, without unnecessary emotion. If you are reading this, it means something has happened that I feared might one day happen. I am sorry that I am not there to stand beside you, but I have made sure you will not stand alone. I paused, my fingers resting lightly against the page. He had always been like this, never dramatic, never loud, but always thinking ahead, always building something quiet and solid beneath the surface. I continued reading. You have more control than you realize and more strength than you have ever needed to use. Do not let anyone convince you otherwise, not even our son. There was no anger in his words, no bitterness, just clarity, the kind of clarity that comes from seeing something long before anyone else is willing to acknowledge it. I folded the letter slowly and set it down on the table beside me. Then I walked through the house, not to remember, but to observe. I noticed the scuff on the hallway floor from years ago, the faint mark on the wall where Wade had once measured his height, the kitchen window where Noel used to stand every morning with his coffee. None of it felt fragile anymore. None of it felt like something that could be taken from me. With a conversation at a dinner table later that afternoon, I heard the front door open without a knock. Wade and Romy did not wait for permission anymore. They walked in like they already owned everything. Wade glanced at me briefly, then looked past me into the living room as if assessing something unfinished. Romy set her bag down and smiled, not warmly, not kindly, but with that same calculated ease I had seen for years. We were thinking, she began, her voice light, like she was suggesting a minor change, that it might be best if we started preparing the house for the transition soon. Contractors are booking weeks in advance, and we do not want delays. I listened without interrupting, my hands resting calmly on the back of a chair. Wade nodded as if this was already decided. It will be easier for everyone if we stay on schedule, he added, still not quite meeting my eyes. I let a small silence form between us, not uncomfortable, not tense, just present. Then I spoke quietly. There will be no transition. They both looked at me, then really looked at me for the first time. That day Romy blinked once, As if she had misheard, I continued, my voice even steady. I will not be moving out, and no one will be making changes to this house. Without my consent, the room did not explode into argument. It did something quieter. It shifted. Wade frowned, slightly confusion, more than anger. That does not make sense, Mom. We already talked about this. I held his gaze, not with force, not with emotion, but with something firmer, certainty. I know what you talked about, I said calmly, but I also know what is actually mine. And for the first time since Noel was gone, I saw something flicker across Wade's face, not confidence, not control, something closer to doubt.